Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out my Prot Paladin class guide for Shadowlands. This is all based on my experiences of testing Prot Paladin, and I have gotten some guidance from Lincoln, who writes the Wowhead Prot Paladin guide. If you want a written version, you can read that guide. You can also ask a question in the comments section, and I will be doing my best to respond to everyone who has questions about the changes that don't really seem to be stopping, despite the fact that we are just a couple of days away from the release of Shadowlands. That's probably enough intro. I should stop doing these. Like and subscribe, it would make me feel nice. Prot Pally time. First question, same as always, why play Prot Paladin? Easy. They do a lot of damage, they're very tanky, Shield of the Righteous uptime can easily hit 100% with the right setup. They have useful self-healing tools, they have massive group utility. Honestly, the question is why play something else? And the answers are like Monk debuff, Demon Hunter debuff, Death Grip, Druid, no. Okay, now to the fun stuff, and let's start with Covenants. Obviously, this is all still subject to change. I really hope it doesn't at this point, but I bet it will. Let's go through the Covenants in order of usefulness. Kyrian is the #1 choice for Prot Paladin, I feel. Divine Toll provides a strong offensive skill on a 1-minute cooldown. It scales excellently in AoE, it interacts with some of your talents and legendaries in a really nice way, it's simple and easy to use, and it's just thematically really consistent. Also in AoE, it's 5 holy power on a single GCD on a 1-minute cooldown. You cannot beat that. In single target, it's not nearly as good. It's basically Avenger's Shield on a 1-minute cooldown. That is the downside to Divine Toll. It's amazingly good when it's good, but it is a little underwhelming when it's not good. I don't plan to seriously raid on Prot Paladin, at least right now, but I do intend to run a fair amount of Mythic Plus on mine, so Kyrian is, at least for me, the right choice. Kyrian also has access to the best signature skill for tanks, an extra health potion. Having access to another instant self-healing tool is a really good thing, and while the bleeds in Castle Nathria have, not all, but some of them have been flagged as no longer being removed by this potion, you know, you could still remove some of the bleeds, and I guess you could also remove some of the bleeds and debuffs with Blessing of Protection or Divine Shield, but hey, it's another health potion. It's really, really good. What more can you say? Beyond that, Kyrian also has a really strong Soulbind in Pelagos. Even after the nerf to his versatility passive, he's good. He grants an extra 10% mastery for 10 or so seconds after using Divine Toll, and a baseline 3% magic damage reduction debuff, their buff that's up all the time. He also lets you pick up 2 potency and 2 endurance conduits, which I think that's pretty clearly the ideal setup for maximizing your throughput. Venthyr is up next, and they are a very competitive option that's more focused towards dealing huge burst damage in raids. Ashen Hollow is a 4-minute cooldown that deals a tremendous amount of AoE damage, and it's clearly the best choice for maximizing your DPS in raids. That being said, it has several obvious downsides. For one, the cast time sucks. It also does force you to stay within a set area, although the radius on Ashen Hallow is pretty big. Also, you're going to want to layer your wings over the top of Ashen Hallow to maximize its damage, but that makes the free Hammer of Wrath casting bonus essentially worthless. Finally, and just most obviously, it's a very long cooldown, and, you know, the class basically just plays like vanilla, uncovenanted Prot Paladin outside of the 12% of the time when Ashen Hallow is active. Of course, it does add a ton of damage and healing, so I think it will be a legitimately very good Covenant choice for raiding, and even for tyrannical Mythic Plus weeks, just for blasting out as much damage as you possibly can into bosses. The signature skill for Venthyr is Door of Shadows, which is basically just a teleport with a cast time. You can use it to skip past trash packs or to blink through boss mechanics, and the extra mobility is pretty nice for Paladin. The best soulbind for Venthyr is General Draven, who grants a passive damage reduction bonus while your health is below 40%, and a stamina and self-healing increase as a reward for standing still for 4 seconds. He's a very tank-oriented soulbind, although he is purely defensive, and if you're looking to maximize your damage, you probably will get more value out of Theotar the Mad Duke. Next up are the Night Fae, and their ability is Blessing of the Seasons. It's really unnecessarily complicated, and it basically just turns you into a buff bot for other members of your group. That style of play may be appealing to you, but I hate it. Essentially, you get 4 rotating 30-second buffs on a 45-second cooldown each, and you can toss them onto yourself or your allies, since DPS in your group are going to get more damage out of a percent DPS increase, and cooldown reduction bonuses as well than a tank. You know what's going to happen. You're their buff bot. It's not horrible mathematically, but it's not fun. No thank you. The Night Fae signature skill, Soul Shape, is a simple mobility skill. More mobility is good for Prot Pallies, although it's not generally as useful as Door of Shadows. The best soulbind associated with the Night Fae is Naya, who grants a stacking, non-refreshing mastery and max health buff every time you cast one of your blessings. It's a good source of some extra stat budget, and I guess it'll make you feel better about giving away all your buffs, right? Maybe not. Necrolords are the worst place option. Vanquisher's Hammer is a 30-second single target damage cooldown. The design made sense back when Word of Glory had its cost reduced by casting Judgment, but now that it doesn't, it's really difficult to justify randomly hard casting Word of Glory to get a free Shield of the Righteous. So what good is this ability now? I guess it can be good if you need self-healing and Shield of the Righteous at the same time, and that's certainly possible, but it's not really all that great even if you do. It's a good single target damage skill just like in a vacuum, but it's still mathematically inferior to just going Venthyr. So yeah, it's not good. The Necrolord signature skill is also underwhelming. It basically just lets you channel a shield up before boss pulls or in between trash packs in Mythic Plus. Starting off combat with a decent sized shield is good, but it'll get chewed up pretty quickly, so it's not like it's some huge defensive gain. It's not useful as a reactive self-heal like the Kyrian potion, and you really shouldn't use it while you're tanking at all. Because channeling the shield prevents you from parrying, dodging, and blocking, you wind up taking more damage than you would prevent, so not good for tanks. And finally, Necrolord soulbinds for Prot Pallies are pretty bad. Bonesmith Hyrmir, whatever, is arguably the strongest due to the reflective damage that Serrated Spalders deals. It can add up to a lot, but that is it. It's just a passive damage increase. So quick summary on Covenants is that Kyrian will be the best all-around option and the best choice for Mythic Plus, but Venthyr is very close and clearly a better DPS option for raids, but not nearly as versatile or reliable in Mythic Plus due to its incredibly long cooldown. You pretty much have to choose between raid and Mythic Plus as a Prot Pally, or you could choose one of the weaker Covenants and be less good at both, I guess. Alright, I talked about soulbinds and pointed out the best trees, but now let's quickly cover conduits which fit into the empty sockets in those soulbind trees. There are 3 kinds of conduits. Potency conduits increase your damage, endurance conduits increase your defenses, and finesse conduits do utility stuff. For tanks, you have 3 potency conduits available at any given time. You can only use 2 in your soulbind tree at once. Each of the Covenants has a potency conduit that corresponds to the Covenant class ability, and then there are 2 generic potency conduits available to Protection Paladins that are usable regardless of your Covenant choice. So let's go right on through them. Punish the Guilty is the better of the 2 generic conduits available to all Protection Paladins. It's a good DPS increase in single target, and it's very simple. Vengeful Shock is the other generic conduit available to Prot Pallies, and I went on a rampage about how overtuned it was about a month or 2 ago, and I may have been the reason it got nerfed by 80%. If so, I'm sorry. I was trying to get other classes buffed. I should have known better that nothing good could happen. Anyways, it's pretty weak now. Honestly, it's still good. It's like 1 to 1.5% more total damage at rank 1, which is better than anything Blood Decays get, but it's probably the worst option available to Prot Pallies. Again, sorry. The Kyrian Potency Conduit is Ringing Clarity, and it's a really strong burst damage increase. It really helps make up for the weakness of Divine Toll and single target in a big way. It does have an element of RNG that I don't love, so I guess you could just run Vengeful Shock instead for a more reliable damage increase, but like, go big or go home. Hallowed Discernment is the Venthyr Potency Conduit. It increases the damage and healing of Ashen Hollow by a pretty considerable amount as well, which just boosts its value as a burst damage cooldown even further. Again, it's less consistent than Vengeful Shock, but it's better for burst. It's very good. The Long Summer is the Night Fae Potency Conduit. Look, if you're going to sign up to be a buff bot, you might as well commit to the idea that you're going to be a really good one. That's all I have to say about that. And lastly, Righteous Might is the Necrolord Potency Conduit. It makes a pretty bad Covenant skill deal a good bit more damage and grants it 100% leech. That is actually pretty cool. It's not great, but again, it's a burst damage increase, and that's good. Alright, Endurance Conduits are a little more straightforward. Resolute Defender is the best Endurance Conduit. It significantly increases the uptime of Ardent Defender, which is a great defensive cooldown. This is a great Endurance Conduit, one of the few available to tanks that actually does a lot of good. Shielding Words is the Endurance Conduit I like as the second option. It's not the best in terms of total healing per second, but it grants shielding when you need it the most. And I think that's a much better bonus than just giving yourself a steady trickle of overhealing. And speaking of steady trickles of overhealing, Golden Path is a competitive self-healing option that constantly heals you while you stand in consecration, which you should always do. It's good, make no mistake, I just think it does less when you need it than Shielding Words does. The other two Endurance Conduits are very forgettable. They don't really do much at all, so don't use them. And finally, Finesse Conduits. Light's Barding is the Finesse Conduit I prefer. It just simply increases the duration of Divine Steve. Given that Pallies struggle so heavily with mobility, I actually think this is a pretty meaningful gain, and I'm a big fan. Echoing Blessings is also decent. The effects from Blessing of Freedom and Protection start as soon as the blessings fall off, so you can self-cast and then instantly clear like you would to, say, remove a bleed debuff while tanking, and you'll get the passive damage reduction or move speed effect. That's not bad. It's not amazing, but it's legitimately not bad for a Finesse Conduit. The other two Finesse Conduits are again pretty meaningless. Okay, next up is Legendaries, and there are quite a few pieces to talk about here, although I think the very first will wind up being the most versatile and generally useful. First up, and my favorite, is Holy Avenger's Engraved Sigil, or as I have chosen to call it because its name is way too long, Holy Gem. It's very good, and as I said before, very versatile. There's basically never a situation in which this isn't a top tier option. You get this pattern from Torghast, so it should be available pretty early on in the expansion. Basically, this legendary grants you way more access to Avenger Shield, and with it more damage, more interrupts, more holy power, and if you're talented into First Avenger, more shielding. It synergizes really brilliantly with First Avenger to be a really good all-around option in AoE. Bulwark of Righteous Fury is the other really good Prot Pally legendary. It only adds damage, but it adds a lot in AoE, even after the nerfs. It drops in the Dungeon Halls of Atonement, so it should be available from early on in Shadowlands. It is most likely going to be the number one choice for Prot Pallies in Mythic Plus due to its DPS value. It may be the number 2 choice behind Holy Gem for defensive reasons early in the expansion, but I have my doubts. People like to deal damage. I like to deal damage, and I'm a person. This adds a lot of it in AoE. It's not great in single targets, so it's not an all-purpose legendary at all, but for what it does well, it's terrific. And next up are the slightly less reliable pair of options. Now, these aren't weaker choices, to be clear. If anything, they're probably the two strongest choices available to Prot Pallies for raiding. They are just more specialized. The Magistrate's Judgment is a terrific defensive choice that will make hitting 100% uptime on Shield of the Righteous pretty trivial. Now, depending on gear, covenants, talents, and RNG, you may already be able to hit 100% uptime just by running Holy Gem, and if you are, then this actually does wind up just being overkill. It does allow for some flexibility in talents, I guess, but generally speaking, if you don't need this to get around 100% Shield of the Righteous uptime, it actually loses a fair bit of power compared to, whatever else you're running. That's really the only downside to it. And last is the Mad Paragon. It's the highest simming option, and while it's weaker defensively than Holy Gem, it's absolutely a stronger burst DPS option that will perform extremely well in raids. It is a Retribution legendary that functions as protection, so that's the only thing to be wary of. It may wind up being nerfed or disabled for Prot. Probably not, hopefully not, but, be prepared. Alright, now that we've covered all of the new Shadowlands class features, let's just focus on the basics. And here's talents. This is the setup I would run for Mythic Plus. There are tons and tons of good swaps available to Prot Pallies. They have one of the best talent trees of all the tanks. In the first tier, all three of the options are available and viable depending on the situation. While Holy Shield is the safest defensively, it's the least interesting. While I'm talking about this, I'm going to switch to the setup now that I would use for raid. First Avenger is a really good offensive option in AoE, although Crusader's Judgment will generate more single target damage and more Shield of the Righteous uptime. And in the final tier, Sanctified Wrath is a better choice for longer pulls, such as in raids, where I prefer Righteous Protector's cooldown reduction for Mythic Plus. In dungeons, I would much rather have a slightly weaker cooldown available every other pull than a slightly stronger cooldown available every 4 or 5 pulls. Maybe if you do massive pulls, the larger cooldown will be more appealing, but given all the AoE nerfs in Shadowlands, I feel like massive pulls are way less appealing now than they ever have been. So I think it's better now to optimize towards shorter pulls that you blow through a little more quickly. There's not a ton to say about the Prot Pally rotation. You want to use all your major cooldowns as much as you can, and you want to keep all your rotational abilities on cooldown as much as you can. Cast Shield of the Righteous as much as you can, and heal only when you absolutely need it to survive. That's about it. The basic stat priority for Prot Pally is pretty much the same as it has been in the past couple of expansions. Haste is the most important stat, you want as much as you can get. Versatility is good and very consistent. It's a solid fallback stat. Mastery is okay, but a little less consistent, and crit is better offensively, but the least consistent defensively. Ultimately, the most important things to go after are sockets and item level, then haste, then versatility, then the rest of the stats don't matter all that much. In terms of noteworthy pieces of gear, most of the gear is pretty interchangeable. Lightless Force is the best weapon enchant for dealing damage, and as far as damaging trinkets go, there are some decent ones from dungeons and raids. Most of the on-use trinkets are all reasonably decent and competitive. The two best damaging trinkets from dungeons are Phial of Putrefaction, which is very, very good, and Grim Codex, which is okay. The two best ones from raid are Dreadfire Vessel from Sire Denathrius and Stone Legion Heraldry from the Stone Legion Generals. Both of those two are excellent. The Dark Moon decks this expansion aren't great. The DPS one lets you leash haste from your enemy for a 20-second haste buff on a 90-second cooldown. It's not great. The tank one is also a 90-second cooldown, and it grants you a minor, brief defensive cooldown that basically blocks part of the next 5 hits you take. It's also a little underwhelming. Neither of them are horrible if you have the gold and you want a quick trinket to, boost your item level and give you a sort of decent piece of gear, but neither of them are great either. I think I would recommend the DPS trinket if you have to choose, and because they're unique equipped, you do have to choose. I think we're all feeling pretty excited for the Shadowlands. Paladin is poised to have a really strong start to this expansion, and I'm ready to be a Kyrian Prot Pally. Vinthyr is also a really powerful raiding option, but a little less versatile, and I don't love the cast time on it. I really did think I wanted to play Vinthyr Prot Pally for a while, and maybe I'll change my mind before I get to it. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Well, I think that covers it. If you have any questions about Prot Paladins and Shadowlands, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands content, and thanks for watching. Bye.